Have you ever been judged before you even had the chance to speak? Imagine walking into a place you helped build only to be told you don't belong there. That's exactly what happened to Henry Carter, a black CEO traveling with his teenage daughter. He wasn't dressed in luxury. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards, just a father, holding 2 boarding passes. But within minutes, humiliation replaced courtesy. Accusations replaced greetings. And his daughter. She saw the world strip her father's dignity right before her eyes. But what would you do in that moment? Would you shout in anger or stand in silence strong enough to shake an entire system? Because 15 minutes later, the same man they tried to remove changed everything. Not with fury, but with truth. Not with revenge, but with reform. This isn't just a story about an airplane. It's about respect, courage, and the moment a father decided to teach the world how real power sounds when it stays calm. If you've ever been misunderstood, this story is for you. So, before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe because some stories remind us who we are, and this is one of them. The first light of morning stretched across Manhattan like a slow exhale. It spilled over glass towers, brushed the Hudson with a line of silver, and crept into a high-rise apartment where Henry Carter stood quietly at the window, mug of coffee in hand. Tie still undone. Behind him, laughter filled the kitchen. Maya was sitting cross-legged on the counter, spoon-deep in a bowl of cereal she'd poured too much milk into. Her curls bounced as she grinned. "Dad, I think I just invented soup instead of breakfast." Henry smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "You'll call it innovation. That's what CEOs do." She laughed. "I'm only 14. He turned, mock serious. "Then you'd better start practicing." It was an ordinary morning, toast crumbs, half-folded clothes, the smell of freshly brewed coffee. But under the rhythm of it all, there was something steady, almost sacred, the calm heartbeat of a man who'd fought his way up from nowhere, and the easy trust of a daughter who saw him not as a CEO, but simply as Dad. Today wasn't just another business trip. They were flying to London, where Maya would receive her first international scholarship for a STEM program, a dream Henry had once whispered to her when she was 8, watching rockets launch on television. He'd promised one day, "You'll build things that reach beyond clouds." Now, that day was here. He adjusted his wristwatch, checked the time. 6:32 a.m. Their flight, Skylink 701, departed in 2 hours, plenty of time, but Henry was never late. He believed punctuality was the simplest form of respect, something the world had often denied him. "Ready?" he asked. Maya slid off the counter, backpack already slung across her shoulder. "Ready for London, Mr. CEO." As they stepped into the hallway, Henry glanced once at the framed photo by the door, him and Maya, 6 years earlier, standing in front of a small house in Atlanta. The caption she'd written under it in blue crayon still showed faintly. "Home is where Dad is." Outside, the city was waking up, taxis honking, pigeons scattering from steam vents, the air smelling faintly of rain and roasted coffee. Henry hailed a cab. The driver, an older man with an accent Henry couldn't quite place, glanced in the mirror. "Airport JFK," Henry said, settling in beside Maya. She pressed her face to the window, watching skyscrapers glide by like giants fading into morning haze. "You nervous?" she asked. "About what? About flying commercial for once? You usually take the company jet." Henry chuckled. "That jet is for business. This is for memories. And besides," he said, glancing at her, I like remembering what the real world feels like. She frowned thoughtfully. What do you mean? Henry paused, watching the traffic roll past. Sometimes, when people get too high up, they forget how others see them. They stop noticing the little things, how they're greeted, who gets ignored, who gets doubted. Maya tilted her head. You mean, like, people judging others? He nodded slowly, exactly like that. For a few seconds, they rode in silence, the city noise softening behind the hum of the cab. Henry's phone buzzed a message from Mateo Cruz, his head of ethics at Skylink Air Safe Travel. Sir, crew notified. Have a good flight. Henry smiled faintly. Typed back, thanks. Mateo, no special treatment, just passengers today. He put the phone away. He didn't want anyone to know who he was on this trip. No name tags, no assistants, no entourage, just a father and his daughter traveling to celebrate something pure. At the airport, crowds spilled through the glass atrium like a tide of briefcases and rolling suitcases. Announcements echoed overhead, delayed flights, gate changes, the usual Monday chaos. Henry moved calmly through security, nodding to the TSA agents who barely looked up. He'd long ago stopped expecting recognition. Respect, he knew, wasn't owed, it was earned daily, quietly. Maya tugged his sleeve. Dad, look, that's our plane through the wide window. The Skylink 787 gleamed on the tarmac, its white fuselage streaked with morning gold. Seats 1A and 1B, Henry said, showing her the passes. Your first time in first class, you'll see the orange juice tastes different up there. She laughed, clutching the tickets. Can I keep mine for my scrapbook? You can keep both if you like, he said. They're your story too. They reached the gate early. Families chatted. Business travelers typed on laptops. A flight attendant checked lists with practiced smiles. Everything looked normal, efficient, polite, ordinary. But sometimes, Henry thought, the worst storms start with clear skies. He didn't know yet that, in less than 20 minutes, this same gate would become the stage of a reckoning, one that would test every lesson he had ever taught his daughter about dignity, patience, and justice. As the boarding announcement played overhead, Maya leaned against him and whispered, You think London smells different. Henry smiled, brushing a curl from her forehead. Every place does, sweetheart. You'll remember this one for a long time. She didn't know how right he was. The boarding gate shimmered under bright fluorescent light. Announcements echoed, voices layered in a familiar airport rhythm, families gathered in loose circles, travelers scrolled through phones, and the hum of jet engines pulsed faintly beyond the glass. Henry and Maya stood at the front of the first-class line, holding their boarding passes. Maya leaned on her backpack strap, tapping her sneakers against the tiled floor. Feels fancy, she whispered. Henry smiled softly. It's just a seat, sweetheart. What matters is where it takes us. At the counter stood Tricia Miles, the boarding supervisor, perfectly dressed in navy blue, every hair pinned into place. Her badge gleamed under the light senior gate supervisor. She looked up with a smile practiced 1,000 times, but the smile faltered the moment she saw Henry. Good morning, Henry greeted, placing the 2 first-class passes on the counter. Carter, seats 1A and 1B. Tricia's eyes flicked from the tickets to him, then to Maya. Something subtle changed in her tone, a hesitation dressed in politeness. I see. Just a moment, sir. Her manicured fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. The sound of typing filled the small silence between them. Maya clutched her ticket tighter. Tricia frowned, glanced at the monitor, then back at Henry. "Sir, it seems there's been a reclassification on your reservation." Henry tilted his head slightly. "A reclassification?" "Yes," she said briskly. "It appears your tickets were downgraded to main cabin. You'll need to proceed to gate D19 for boarding." The air around them seemed to shift. Henry didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "There must be a mistake." These seats were confirmed last night. Tricia's expression remained controlled, but her eyes flicked sideways to the line forming behind them. "Sir, I understand, but the system doesn't lie." A businessman waiting nearby, Daniel Cole, gave a short laugh under his breath. "Maybe they used miles," he muttered, just loud enough for others to hear. Maya's cheeks flushed. She looked down at her shoes, then up at her father. Henry caught the moment the small tremor in her hand, the confusion in her eyes. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "It's all right." Then, turning back to Tricia, his voice even but firm, "I'd appreciate it if you double-check the manifest. Passenger Henry Carter. Maya Carter. First class, confirmed yesterday by corporate." Tricia hesitated. "Mr. Carter, please step aside while we continue boarding. We'll look into it." The phrase "step aside" landed sharper than intended. People in line began to whisper. Henry felt the familiar heat rise in his chest. Not anger, but disappointment that still stung after all these years. He took a slow breath. "I understand the procedure," he said quietly, "but you might want to verify before assuming." Tricia gave a tight smile. "Security protocol, sir. Security protocol." 2 words Henry had heard too many times, in too many forms, for too many years. Behind them, a couple whispered, "What's going on?" Daniel Cole crossed his arms, shaking his head. "Always a scene," he said, voice dripping with judgment. Henry turned slightly, meeting Daniel's gaze. There was no anger in his eyes, only a calm that unnerved the man enough to look away. "Dad," Maya said softly, "did we do something wrong?" Henry knelt slightly so his eyes were level with hers. "No, honey, we just ran into someone else's mistake." She frowned. "Then why do they look at us like that?" He paused, searching for the gentlest truth he could give her, because sometimes people see what they expect instead of what's real. The announcement chimed again. "Now boarding first-class passengers for Flight 701 to London." A row of travelers passed through easily suits, briefcases, designer coats greeted with smiles and warmth. Henry noticed how Tricia's tone lightened with each new face. When they turned back to him, the warmth cooled again. He waited. Patient, composed. The same patience that had once carried him through boardrooms full of doubt, through headlines that questioned his worth, through every quiet battle he'd fought to prove that success could wear the skin he was born with. But this was different. This wasn't a board meeting. This was his daughter watching how the world measured her father. Maya wiped at her eyes. "Maybe we should just go. Dad." Henry shook his head gently. "Justice doesn't come by walking away. Sweetheart, it comes by standing still until the truth catches up." Tricia tapped her keyboard again, frustrated. "Sir, I've told you." Henry's tone deepened, calm but heavy with authority. "I know you have, Ms. Miles, but your system isn't the truth. People write systems, and people can be wrong." Her jaw tightened. "Are you suggesting I'm suggesting?" Henry interrupted softly. that you take one more look before embarrassing your airline." Her lips parted, but no words came. Behind her, the screen flickered. For a brief second, the manifest loaded, and Henry caught sight of his own name on the list before it vanished again. He smiled faintly, a quiet, knowing smile. Sometimes the truth just needs time to appear. Trisha's voice lost a little of its edge. "Please, wait to the side." "Sir." Henry exhaled slowly. He turned to Maya, voice calm. "Let's give them a few minutes." They stepped aside, near the large window overlooking the runway. The sunlight stretched across the floor, outlining them both in gold. Henry placed his hands in his pockets, steady as ever. Maya leaned close. "Dad, you're not mad." He looked down at her, eyes gentle. "Anger's too heavy for mornings like this. Let's save it for when it's useful." From behind them, Daniel Cole chuckled again. "Man's trying to play calm. I'd be embarrassed." Henry didn't turn. He simply said, "You confuse calm with weakness. They're not the same." The words hung in the air, quiet but sharp enough to still the whispers for a moment. Trisha's voice called out again over the intercom, slightly strained, continuing boarding for first-class passengers. Flight 701. Henry glanced at his watch. 8:12 am. In 3 minutes, patience would turn into something else entirely. He didn't know that. Soon, the entire gate would go silent, and the people who doubted him would learn that calm doesn't mean powerless, it only means ready. The sunlight had shifted slightly across the floor, catching the metallic Skylink logo behind the gate counter. Henry stood near the glass window, arms crossed loosely, eyes fixed on the runway beyond. He looked calm, but the reflection in the window betrayed a tightening in his jaw. Maya sat on one of the nearby seats, her backpack in her lap. Her eyes followed the boarding line people moving forward, tickets scanning green, gate agents smiling. To her, the process suddenly looked unfair, like a game where the rules changed depending on who was playing. Trisha Miles glanced at them more than once. Each time she did, her unease deepened. Something about Henry's posture, composed, still unshakable, made her nervous. Yet pride stiffened her back. She whispered to the attendant beside her, "Just move them to main cabin. The system says economy." The attendant hesitated. "But the names are still on the manifest for 1A and 1B. It looks like Trisha cut him off. It's probably a booking error. Fix it after takeoff. We need to finish boarding." The attendant nodded reluctantly. Henry turned then, as if sensing the whisper. His voice was calm, low, controlled. "Ms. Miles, may I ask how long you've worked with Skylink?" Trisha blinked. 10 years, sir. 10 years," Henry repeated quietly. "Then I imagine you know that customer service doesn't begin with 'step aside.'" Her cheeks flushed slightly. "Sir, I was following procedure. Procedure is supposed to serve people," Henry said, "not replace them." Before she could reply, another uniformed figure approached Ben Rowe, the lead flight attendant. His posture was textbook professional straight back, clipboard in hand, smile neutral. "Ms. Miles," he said. "What seems to be the issue here?" Trisha exhaled as if relieved to hand it off. "Passenger insists he's first class, but system shows a downgrade." Ben turned to Henry, expression polite. "Good morning, sir. May I see your boarding passes?" Henry handed them over silently. Ben scanned them, then glanced at his tablet. His brow furrowed. "That's strange," Ben murmured. "The ticket number matches a first-class purchase, but the seat assignment changed. It's showing. Coach, row 23. Maya's voice broke in, small and shaking. We're supposed to be in the front. My dad said we were. Ben looked at her kindly, then at Henry. Sir, I'm sure it's just a technical error, but we can't hold the line. We'll sort it out on board. On board, Henry repeated softly. You want me to walk past the very seats I paid for to reach one that isn't mine in front of my daughter? Ben's practiced calm faltered. It's just policy, sir. Henry gave a faint, ironic smile. Policies seem to do a lot of talking today from behind them. Daniel Cole's voice cut in again. If they don't belong up here, just move them already. We've got schedules too. The nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. A few avoided eye contact. Others pretended to be busy with their phones. Maya's eyes filled again, but she blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Henry turned toward Cole, voice still even. I hope your flight is smooth, sir. It's a long way to London, a long time to sit with yourself. Cole scoffed and stepped forward in line, muttering, Unbelievable. Tricia cleared her throat. Sir, please, let's not cause a scene. Henry's eyes narrowed slightly. You think I'm causing one? Tricia hesitated. No, I'm standing here, Henry said, voice deep but steady. Waiting for someone to see me is more than a barcode. Silence fell over the gate area. Even the ambient chatter seemed to fade. Ben glanced toward the side desk, gesturing subtly for security. Henry noticed and sighed, rubbing his temple. You're calling security, sir. It's just for protocol, Ben said quickly. We need to manage. Henry interrupted quietly. You know, that word protocol keeps doing a lot of heavy lifting today. Maya stood, trembling now. Dad, please, let's just go. He looked at her, eyes softening instantly. I promised you this trip was about joy. I won't let them teach you fear instead. Then he turned back to Tricia and Ben. Check again, not the screen, the manifest itself. Tricia sighed. Sir, everything we have is digital. Then find the printout, Henry said calmly. There's always a printout. Something in his voice, quiet authority wrapped in patience, made Ben pause. He looked uncertain now. I'll see what I can find. As he walked off, Tricia leaned toward Henry. Sir, I understand you're upset, but threatening staff isn't the answer. Henry blinked slowly, almost pityingly. If calm words sound like threats to you, Ms. Miles, you've been listening to the wrong people. A few heads turned. Someone nearby whispered, He's handling this better than anyone I've seen. Another voice murmured, Who is he? Henry heard, but he didn't respond. His gaze drifted back to Maya, who sat again, eyes red but jaw set. She whispered, You're not even mad, are you? He smiled faintly. Anger's easy, baby girl. Change is harder. We're choosing the hard thing. Ben returned with a sheet of paper in hand, the printed manifest. His expression had shifted from professional to uneasy. He placed the paper on the counter and pointed. Here, he said quietly. Henry Carter, Maya Carter. Seats 1A and 1B. Priority 1. Tricia's color drained from her face. She glanced between the page and her screen, disbelief flickering in her eyes. That's impossible, she whispered. It must be an old version. Henry stepped closer, his presence calm but unshakable. The only thing old here, he said softly, is the habit of assuming people like me don't belong. Tricia's lips parted, but no sound came. Ben looked at her, then at Henry. "Sir, give us a moment to verify." Henry nodded once. "You have 2 minutes." He turned back to Maya, who was now staring at him with a mix of awe and pride. "See," he said quietly, "the truth just needed someone patient enough to wait for it." She smiled weakly through the tears. "You're really not afraid of them, are you?" He chuckled softly. "Fear only works when you believe they can take something from you. They can't take who we are." As the boarding gate light blinked red, Tricia typed frantically, whispering into her headset. Her fingers shook. Henry stood tall, the morning light pooling behind him, his reflection sharp against the glass wall. Within that stillness, he felt the quiet before the real storm, the moment just before power shifts and the truth demands to be heard. He checked his watch. 8:20 a.m. 5 more minutes, and everything would change. Tricia's fingers hovered uncertainly over the keyboard. The red light on the boarding scanner blinked in a steady rhythm, matching the pulse pounding faintly in her temple. The manifest in front of her said one thing, her monitor said another, and standing before her, silent but unyielding, was Henry Carter the man she'd just accused of belonging somewhere else? Ben leaned over her shoulder, reading the paper again. "It's definitely here," he murmured. "1A and 1B, Priority 1 clearance. There's even a corporate reference code," Tricia whispered. "Then why doesn't it show on the screen?" Henry answered before Ben could. "Because systems are only as fair as the people who build them." His tone wasn't sharp. It was measured, deliberate, the kind of calm that demanded attention without ever raising its volume. Ben turned toward him, tablet still in hand. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, how did you book these tickets directly through the corporate channel?" Henry said, "I travel often, usually without this much theater." A faint ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread among nearby passengers. Someone muttered, "He's got a point." Tricia stiffened. "Sir, please understand this isn't personal. We deal with booking errors every day." Henry met her eyes steadily. "Is that so? Then how many of those errors look like me?" The question hung in the air like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Tricia's throat tightened. "I don't appreciate the implication, Mr." Henry raised a hand gently. "Neither do I, Miss Miles, yet here we are." For a long second, silence stretched across the gate. Even Daniel Cole, who'd been quietly smirking earlier, shifted uncomfortably and pretended to check his phone. Ben cleared his throat. "I'll call operations to confirm, sir. It'll just take a moment." Henry nodded. "Thank you. That's all I asked, for a moment of fairness." As Ben stepped away, Tricia busied herself with her monitor, tapping harder than necessary. Her polished professionalism had cracked into defensiveness. She could feel people watching, judging. The weight of their eyes burned against her composure. Maya sat back in her chair, legs drawn up, trying to disappear into the fabric. Her voice came out small. "Dad, are you okay?" Henry crouched slightly, just enough so he could see her face. "I'm fine, baby girl. But they're being mean." He smiled softly. "They're being human. Sometimes that means getting it wrong before they learn what right looks like." She blinked, trying to understand. "You don't even look mad." Henry chuckled. "Mad doesn't fix broken things. Truth does. Behind them." Ben was still on the phone, speaking in hushed tones to operations. Tricia avoided looking at Henry, instead pretending to adjust boarding settings she no longer needed to touch. Finally, Ben returned. His expression had shifted, no longer neutral. There was unease there now. "Sir, I just spoke with Operations Control. They confirmed. Your tickets were valid and first class, but someone at the gate management level manually changed your reservation at 6:47 a.m. A murmur rippled through the waiting passengers. Tricia's face went pale. Henry tilted his head slightly. "Manually changed." "Yes, sir," Ben said quietly, "from a terminal registered to gate C12. Tricia's hands froze on the desk. She could feel her heart hammering. Henry's voice lowered. "So, this isn't a system error after all." Tricia tried to speak, but her voice came out tight. There must have been a mix-up. Maybe someone thought Henry finished for her. His tone, gentle but cutting. "Thought what?" "Ms. Miles. That I couldn't possibly afford a first-class ticket." She opened her mouth, closed it again. Maya whispered, "Dad," but he raised a hand, steadying the moment with his calm. "I asked for patience," Henry said softly, "not privilege. But what you've shown me is how easily respect is downgraded when someone assumes who deserves it." Ben swallowed hard. "Sir, if I may, I think it's best if we resolve this quietly. I can personally escort you and your daughter on board now." Henry studied him. Quietly, Ben hesitated, for everyone's comfort. A faint smile curved Henry's lips, weary, almost sad. Comfort is rarely where truth lives. "Mr. Rowe." He straightened, looking around at the passengers who were pretending not to listen. "You see, comfort is what lets people walk past wrong without noticing it. But I notice, because my daughter is watching." Maya's fingers tightened around his hand. The crowd grew still. Even Tricia's colleague had stopped pretending to type. Ben's voice softened. "Sir, please, we didn't mean any disrespect." Henry's gaze returned to Tricia. "Disrespect doesn't need intent, it just needs habit." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen for a second before pressing call. He spoke quietly, the way executives do when their words matter more than their volume. "Mateo, Henry Carter, yes, at JFK, gate C12. Tricia's breath caught. She recognized the name, Henry Carter. Her eyes darted to Ben, who stared at Henry as if seeing him for the first time. "Mateo," Henry continued, his tone still even. "I believe we have a situation here. I need verification on an unauthorized downgrade and a review of gate-level decision logs within the last 2 hours." He paused, listening. "Yes, I'll wait." He hung up, then looked at Tricia. 10 minutes, Ms. Miles. That's how long it takes for truth to travel when people finally stop standing in its way." Her face flushed deep red. "Mr. Carter, I didn't know who you were." Henry shook his head slowly. "That's exactly the problem. You didn't have to." Maya watched her father, awe flickering behind her tear-filled eyes. For the first time that morning, she understood this wasn't just about 2 seats on a plane, it was about dignity. The gate area had grown silent except for the distant hum of a departing jet. Henry glanced at his watch. 8:30. The flight was already boarding, but no one dared to move. Tricia finally spoke, her voice barely steady. "Sir, I truly apologize. I never meant to offend." Henry nodded once. Apologies matter less than the lesson they leave behind. "I hope this one stays with you." Ben stepped forward, lowering his tone. "Should we still board you now?" Sir Henry looked out at the plane waiting beyond the glass. then back to the anxious faces before him. "No," he said quietly. "We'll wait until the truth arrives. And when it does, I'd like everyone here to see it." He turned to Maya. "Sometimes the hardest lessons happen under bright lights, sweetheart, but they're the ones that make the world brighter afterward." Maya leaned against him, whispering, "Does the truth hurt?" "Dad," he smiled softly, "only when it's finally seen." Behind them, a voice over the intercom called, "Operations to gate C-12." Every head turned. Henry exhaled, calm as ever. "Looks like truth is right on time." The sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence that had settled like a blanket over gate C-12. A team of airport operations staff moved through the crowd, led by a tall man in a gray suit with a Skylink badge clipped to his lapel. His stride was quick but controlled, his expression serious. Maya turned her head slightly, her fingers still tangled in the sleeve of her father's jacket. "Is that him?" she whispered. Henry gave a single nod. "Yes, Mateo Cruz." Tricia straightened immediately, trying to reassemble her composure. She adjusted her scarf, stood tall, and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mateo stopped in front of the counter, scanning the scene. His sharp eyes took in the passengers, the frozen staff, the paper manifest on the desk, and, finally, Henry, who stood in perfect stillness. "Mr. Carter," Mateo said with quiet respect. "I came as soon as I got your call." A faint murmur ran through the watching crowd. "Mr. Carter. Not just sir, not just passenger." Tricia swallowed hard. Henry's tone was calm but edged with gravity. "Thank you. Mateo, I appreciate your punctuality." Mateo nodded slightly, turning to the gate crew. "Can someone explain what happened here?" Tricia tried first. "There was a system error, I believe. Mr. Carter's booking was downgraded, but we've now verified his tickets were valid for first class." "Downgraded by whom?" Mateo asked. Tricia hesitated. I may have initiated a review, but it wasn't intentional." His profile triggered a flag during pre-boarding checks. Mateo's brow furrowed. A flag Ben shifted uncomfortably. "We've been trained to look out for potential discrepancies attire, unusual booking codes, things like that." Henry's eyes softened slightly, though his voice stayed firm. "You mean people who don't look like they belong?" Maya's small voice broke through the tension. "They thought we were pretending, didn't they?" Every adult froze. Henry turned toward her, his face gentle. "They made an assumption. That's all. But it hurt." Maya said quietly, "I saw how they looked at you." Her voice trembled, and the words hit harder than any accusation could. She wasn't angry, she was sad. Sad in the way children are when they realize fairness isn't guaranteed. Henry knelt so his eyes were level with hers. "I know it hurt, sweetheart, but sometimes people's eyes are trained to see wrong things first. Our job isn't to hate them for it. It's to teach them what they missed." Her eyes shone with tears. "But why does it keep happening to you?" That question struck him deeper than he expected. For a moment, Henry's calm cracked not visibly, but somewhere deep inside. A long-suppressed ache stirred. He reached for her hand. "Because I was born into a world that learns slowly, but every time we stand firm, we make it learn faster." She nodded weakly, tears spilling now. Henry brushed one away with his thumb. "Don't cry. Maya, crying gives them your peace. Keep that for yourself, behind them." Mateo cleared his throat softly, pulling Henry back to the present. "We've already started reviewing the terminal logs. The downgrade was manual, time-stamped, and unauthorized. The word unauthorized drew a ripple through the crowd again. Trisha's composure broke. I didn't mean it was automatic, I thought Mateo interrupted, gently but firmly. Ms. Miles, stop. The record shows your credentials. Let's not make this worse. Her voice shook. Please, Mateo, I swear I wasn't trying to. Henry raised a hand slightly, let her speak. Mateo hesitated, then nodded. Trisha looked at Henry, tears threatening now. I just thought. I saw your name. No company field filled in, casual close, and the system pinged a warning. I thought maybe the ticket was Henry finished quietly. Stolen. She flinched as if struck. No, not stolen. Just not meant for me. Her eyes dropped. I didn't mean it like that. But that's how it landed. Henry said softly, and the way things land tells you where they came from. Ben lowered his eyes too. We followed what we were told in training. Sir, patterns, warnings, red flags. Henry sighed. And did those patterns ever show faces like mine? No one answered. Maya wiped her eyes again. Dad, can we go home? Henry stood slowly, straightening his shoulders. Not yet, baby girl. Not until we finish what they started. He turned to Mateo. What happens next? Mateo's tone was measured. We'll file an incident report and forward it to corporate ethics. Ms. Miles will be suspended pending review. Henry's gaze lingered on Trisha for a moment. Suspension isn't the lesson, he said softly. Understanding is. She looked at him. Surprised? You're not angry. Henry smiled faintly. Anger's easy. Accountability's harder. Then he turned to Mateo. But you'll make sure it's thorough. Every name, every file, every pattern that taught them to see difference before dignity. Mateo nodded solemnly. I will. Henry's voice softened. Good, because I've been in too many rooms where people said, we'll fix it, and nothing changed. Not this time. He looked around at the passengers, their uneasy silence, their averted eyes. You've all seen what assumption looks like. Remember it, because silence keeps it alive. Daniel Cole shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His earlier arrogance had drained into shame. When Henry's eyes met his, he looked away. Maya's small voice rose again, trembling but clear. Dad, are they going to say sorry? Henry looked down at her, then back at the group. They already did in their own way, but we'll see if they mean it tomorrow. Mateo placed a gentle hand on Henry's shoulder. We'll escort you on board, sir. Henry shook his head. No, Mateo, not yet. He knelt once more beside his daughter. Do you know why I asked you to come on this trip? She sniffled. Because you said it was time I saw what you do. He smiled. That's right. And today, you're seeing it, not the work I do, but why I do it, because change doesn't start in boardrooms. Maya, it starts in places like this where someone decides not to walk away. She stared at him for a long moment, then whispered, I think I understand now. Henry pressed a kiss to her forehead. Then it was worth it. Behind them, Mateo's phone buzzed. He glanced at the message and looked up sharply. Corporate's online. They've confirmed your authority to act. Whatever you decide now becomes official procedure. Henry nodded slowly. The next 10 minutes would decide whether this was just another apology or the start of something larger. He took one last look at the manifest, the staff, the crowd. His voice, when it came, was soft but carried the weight of every quiet battle he'd ever fought. Then, let's make it official. And in that still moment, before policy, before consequences, Henry Carter reached for truth, not as a weapon, but as a promise that his daughter would never have to learn dignity from pain again. The terminal had gone eerily quiet. The usual airport soundtrack chatter, footsteps, the beep of scanners seemed to have faded into nothing. Every pair of eyes at Gate C-12 was fixed on Henry Carter. Mateo's voice broke the silence. "Mr. Carter, the line is open. Corporate is ready for your statement." Henry looked at him calmly, then at the frightened, confused faces around him. "Put it on speaker." Mateo did. A faint click, then a voice filled the air, clear, respectful, professional. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. This is Executive Liaison Desk at Skylink Corporate. We're standing by." Trisha's lips parted. She blinked rapidly. "Wait." Your Henry turned toward her, his tone gentle but steady. "Yes, Henry Carter, founder and majority shareholder of Skylink Air Group." The words dropped into the air like stones hitting still water, sending ripples of disbelief across the crowd. Gasps, murmurs. A few people audibly said, "Oh my God." Trisha's hand flew to her mouth. Ben froze in place, clipboard halfway to the desk. Daniel Cole, who had been lounging arrogantly a moment ago, sat bolt upright, face drained of color. Maya's small voice rose through the stunned quiet. "You own the airline." Henry smiled faintly. "I built it, sweetheart, brick by brick, plane by plane, with people who believed the sky should belong to everyone." She looked at him with wide eyes, awe mixed with a growing pride that glimmered through the fading tears. Mateo straightened beside him. "Mr. Carter, would you like to proceed?" Henry nodded once. His gaze swept the gate, his voice carrying effortlessly, not loud, but clear, commanding in its quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't come here today as your CEO. I came as a father, traveling with his daughter, expecting the same respect I give to everyone in this company from boardroom to baggage claim." He paused, letting the words sink in. But somewhere along the way, respect became conditional. People started deciding who looked like they belonged, and that's not the company I built. Trisha was trembling now. "Mr. Carter, I swear Henry lifted a hand slightly, stopping her without a word. "You made a mistake. Ms. Miles, you assumed. That's not unforgivable. What's unforgivable is pretending you didn't." The room was utterly silent. Even the boarding announcements for other flights felt distant, irrelevant. Ben spoke softly. "Sir, I'm so sorry. We thought we were following procedure." Henry turned his calm gaze toward him. "Then procedure needs rewriting." He looked at Mateo. "Effective immediately. I want the Skylink Fair Conduct Review launched, starting with this gate, this flight, this team. Every incident, every pattern, every bias report that's ever been ignored. Bring it all forward." Mateo nodded, already typing on his tablet. "Yes, sir. I'll activate the order." Henry continued. Voice even. "Suspend half the supervisory staff pending review. I don't care about tenure or titles. If we built a culture that allows humiliation to hide behind procedure, then the fault is mine and I intend to correct it." The passengers exchanged stunned looks. Daniel Cole looked like he wanted to disappear. Trisha's voice broke. "Please, Mr. Carter, I have children. This job." Henry looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "And I have a daughter, too, which is why I can't let her grow up in a world where people like her father are treated like thieves in the spaces they built." Maya's eyes brimmed again, but this time not with sadness, with something closer to awe. "Dad," she whispered, "you're really doing it, aren't you?" He smiled gently. "Doing what? Fixing it? Right here." Henry's voice lowered, almost like a promise. "One gate at a time." A corporate voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Carter, confirmation internal order. Skylink FR7 initiated. Gate C12 flagged for immediate ethics investigation. Shall we issue the official staff notification?" Henry's tone was steady. "Yes, and make it public." Mateo's fingers flew across the screen. Within seconds, phones around the gate began buzzing. Notifications pinged the company's emergency communication app, pushing an alert. Effective immediately, temporary suspension and investigation of select Skylink personnel at JFK Gate C12 following verified discrimination incident. Statement to follow. A gasp swept the area. Someone whispered, "He really just fired half the staff." Henry took a slow breath, his eyes on Tricia. "No, I didn't fire anyone. I gave them a chance to rebuild. Firing only ends a mistake. Accountability teaches you never to repeat it." Mateo gave a faint smile. "You always did have a better way of saying it." Henry turned to Maya. "You see, sweetheart justice isn't about revenge. It's about repair." Maya leaned her head lightly against his arm. "You make it sound easy." He smiled, wistful. "It's never easy. It's just necessary." Tricia wiped her eyes, voice breaking. "Mr. Carter, I'll accept whatever comes, but please know, I'm truly sorry." Henry studied her, the exhaustion visible now beneath his calm. "Then take this as your second chance. Learn what it means to see people before systems." She nodded weakly, tears spilling down her cheeks. Daniel Cole rose from his seat, approaching hesitantly. "Mr. Carter," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology, too. I spoke out of line earlier. Henry didn't let him finish. You don't owe me words. You owe yourself better beliefs." Cole nodded slowly, shame written across his face. Mateo looked around. "Mr. Carter, the crew on board has been notified. Captain Wallace is standing by." Henry nodded. "Then let's board." Maya's had enough lessons for one morning. As they walked toward the jet bridge, the passengers stepped aside, a ripple of quiet respect following their path. Some clapped softly, not out of formality, but from something deeper. Gratitude, recognition. Maya looked up at her father. You didn't shout, you didn't get angry, but everyone listened. Henry smiled. The loudest voice in any room, Maya, is the one that doesn't need to prove itself. They stepped onto the bridge, the morning light filtering through the narrow windows, wrapping them in gold. Behind them, Mateo lingered at the gate, watching the stunned faces of the staff. He turned to Tricia. "You're lucky," he said quietly. "Most people never get to learn a lesson directly from the man who wrote the company's values." Tricia nodded through tears. "He's not what I expected." Mateo looked toward the plane, where Henry and Maya were disappearing through the door. "He never is." Inside the cabin, Henry and Maya reached their seats 1A and 1B, the ones they'd fought to reclaim. Maya ran her hand over the seat's leather armrest, a small smile spreading across her face. Henry placed his briefcase under the seat, exhaled deeply, and looked out the window. The runway stretched wide before him, clean, endless, filled with light. He closed his eyes briefly, whispering a line his late mother once told him, "Sometimes God doesn't move mountains for you, son. He just teaches you how to stand still until they crumble." The engines roared to life, and for the first time that morning, Henry Carter allowed himself a quiet smile, not of triumph, but of peace. The hum of the jet engines filled the cabin, steady and low, a kind of white noise that usually lulled travelers into calm. But today, the air felt heavier, like the quiet after a storm that no one quite knew how to talk about. Henry sat by the window in the seat 1A, his reflection faint against the morning sky. The city below was already a blur of light and movement. Across from him, Maya sat curled up with a blanket, her headphones hanging loosely around her neck, eyes watching her father more than the clouds. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Then Maya broke the silence. "Does it always feel like this after you stand up for something?" Henry turned to her. "Like what she thought for a moment. Like you won, but it still hurts." He smiled softly, eyes thoughtful. "That's the price of changing something that wasn't built right. It hurts because it's work that matters." Maya nodded slowly. "They all look scared of you." "Dad." Henry's gaze softened. "People often confuse power with punishment. I wasn't there to scare them. I was there to remind them what fairness looks like." The flight attendant approached. It was Ben Rowe. He looked composed, but his voice held a careful humility. "Mr. Carter. Ms. Carter. I wanted to personally apologize. I should have spoken up sooner." Henry studied him for a moment. "You followed what you thought was right." Ben lowered his eyes. "That doesn't make it right." Henry nodded. "True, but recognizing that now means you're already ahead of where you were this morning." Ben exhaled, visibly relieved that Henry's tone held no resentment. "I don't know what to say except, thank you for showing restraint. Most people would have screamed." Henry gave a faint smile. "Screaming rarely teaches anyone to listen." Ben hesitated, then said, "The crew talked about what happened. Some are shaken. Captain Wallace wants to meet you once we reach cruising altitude." "Of course," Henry said quietly. "No one's beyond a conversation." As Ben walked away, Maya turned to her father. "You always talk like that, calm, like every word already knows where it's going." Henry chuckled. "Words can be like planes, Maya. Some are built to take off fast and crash just as quickly. Others are built to last the whole journey." She grinned faintly. "You should put that on one of your company posters." He laughed quietly, the sound lightening the air between them. Outside, clouds drifted like soft mountains. Henry rested his chin on his hand, looking out at the endless horizon. The sky had always been a kind of church for him, vast, open, equal to everyone who entered it. He thought of his own father, a postal worker who'd once said, "Son, if you ever get to fly, remember to take everyone with you." That line had built the foundation of Skylink, affordable fares, fair hiring, equal opportunity, and yet, even after all that, here he was still proving he belonged. Maya's voice pulled him back. "Dad, were you ever treated like that before?" He hesitated. "More times than I can count, even when you were already the boss, especially then," he said softly. Maya frowned. "That's not fair." Henry's smile was bittersweet. "It isn't. But fairness isn't something that exists until someone makes it exist." The seatbelt sign chimed off. Ben returned, this time accompanied by Captain Wallace, a silver-haired man in his 50s with a calm demeanor. He stopped by Henry's seat. "Mr. Carter," the captain began. "I just received the ethics bulletin." I didn't know what happened before boarding, but I want to say that's not what this airline stands for." Henry met his eyes. "I appreciate that, Captain, but an airline doesn't stand for anything until its people do." The captain nodded slowly, clearly moved. "You're right. We'll do better." He looked at Maya, offering a small smile. "You've got quite a dad." Maya smiled shyly. "I know." When they left, she turned back to Henry. "Everyone's acting nicer now." Henry leaned back in his seat. Kindness shouldn't depend on titles, but sometimes it takes one to remind people what respect looks like. She grew quiet, thoughtful. "I still don't understand why you didn't just fire everyone right there." Henry looked out the window again. "Because I don't want obedience. I want awareness. Fear changes actions. Empathy changes hearts." Maya watched him for a long moment, then whispered, "That's harder." He nodded. "It's also the only change that lasts." For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, the hum of the engines wrapping around them like a song. Then Henry reached for his laptop bag and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, old, worn, filled with scribbled thoughts. He flipped to a blank page and began to write, his pen moving in slow, deliberate strokes. Maya leaned closer. "What are you writing?" He smiled faintly. "A message. To who? To everyone at Skylink." He said, "I'm calling it the 36,000-foot lesson." She giggled. "That sounds like homework." "In a way, it is." He kept writing. "I want every employee from the ground crew to the board to read what happened today and remember that dignity doesn't start with a title or a seat number." Maya tilted her head. "What are you going to say?" He read softly as he wrote. "Today, at Gate C-12, I met good people trapped in a bad habit. They forgot that respect isn't given to uniforms, it's given to humanity. We will change that. Not through punishment, but through reflection, retraining, and responsibility. No one who wears our wings will ever confuse appearance for worth again." He looked up at Maya. "How does that sound?" She smiled, like something people will remember. He closed the notebook gently. "Then it's enough." The plane tilted slightly, sunlight spilling through the window, bathing both of them in gold. Maya reached for his hand. "Dad, I think this trip's already changing me." He looked at her, his expression soft but proud. "Then it's already worth it." A few rows back, Ben watched quietly. He'd been listening from a distance, guilt turning slowly into resolve. He opened his own notepad app and typed a simple message, "New standards see the person before the passenger." As the flight continued, the cabin began to breathe again, passengers relaxing, attendants moving more gently, a strange unity forming in the air. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, human. Maya leaned her head on her father's shoulder. "You think people can really change?" "Dad," Henry smiled. "I think they already are." Outside, the clouds parted, revealing the curve of the earth below soft blues and whites stretching endlessly. And somewhere between New York and London, between hurt and healing, a father and daughter carried the first spark of a new sky, one where no one would ever have to prove they belonged again. The seatbelt sign chimed on, and the cabin began to stir awake. Blankets folded, tray tables snapped back into place. The soft rustle of passengers preparing to land filled the air. Outside, the horizon of London glowed under a pale dusk, streaks of pink and gold cutting through the clouds. Henry looked out the window, his reflection calm, thoughtful. He had barely moved for the last hour, lost in quiet reflection. Maya leaned forward slightly, eyes glued to the window. "It's so pretty," she whispered. He smiled faintly. Every ending should look like a beginning. The wheels touched the runway with a soft thud, followed by the rush of air as the engine slowed. The passengers exhaled almost in unison. The usual applause replaced this time by a kind of reverent silence. Everyone on that flight knew they'd witnessed something different, something that would outlast the journey. When the plane finally reached the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow. Before we disembark, I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Henry Carter and his daughter Maya for traveling with us today. Sir, it was an honor." The cabin filled with murmurs, heads turning toward the front. Some passengers clapped softly, others simply nodded gestures of respect. Quiet but sincere. Ben Rowe appeared again, standing near Henry's seat. "Mr. Carter, we've been asked to escort you and your daughter through a private exit. There's quite a bit of press waiting." Henry sighed gently. "Of course there is." Maya's eyes widened. "Press." They know Ben nodded. "News travels fast, ma'am." Henry glanced at his daughter with a small smile. "That's what happens when truth finally takes flight." As they walked down the jet bridge, Henry noticed a few passengers stepping aside, offering quiet words. "Thank you for what you did. You made me think differently. I'll tell my kids about this." He nodded politely, accepting their words not as praise, but as proof that something had shifted. The terminal was buzzing. At the far end, flashes from cameras flickered like lightning. Reporters were gathering behind security ropes, microphones raised. Henry stopped for a moment, taking a breath before stepping forward. Mateo Cruz was already there, waiting beside a Skylink banner. His tie was loosened, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes carried the spark of purpose. "It's everywhere, Henry," he said quietly. "The story broke an hour ago. The footage from a passenger went viral, 500,000 views in under 60 minutes. Henry raised an eyebrow. That fast, Mateo nodded. "People are calling it the Gate C-12 moment." The taglines spreading. "Calm isn't weakness, it's power." Henry almost smiled. Catchy. Mateo lowered his voice. "The boards already reached out. They're behind you, but they want a statement tonight." Henry looked down at Maya, who clutched his hand tighter. "Then we'll give them one." They walked toward the cluster of cameras. The crowd's buzz swelled, a tide of voices calling his name. Maya stayed close, trying to steady her breathing. Henry squeezed her hand. "Just speak truth. No matter how loud the world gets," he whispered. As they reached the microphones, the flash of cameras burst like fireworks. Questions flew from every direction. "Mr. Carter, is it true you suspended half the staff? Was this a publicity stunt? What message are you sending about racial bias in corporate America? Sir, are you planning to press charges?" Henry raised a hand lightly, and the noise fell to a hush. His voice was calm, deliberate, the same quiet strength that had silenced an airport hours earlier. "What happened at Gate C-12 wasn't a scandal," he said. "It was a mirror, a reflection of habits we've all allowed to grow, unchecked habits that decide worth based on sight before substance." He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "But we can change that. We will. Skylink was built on the promise that every person who walks through our gates deserves dignity, no matter what they wear, what they earn, or what they look like." Maya watched him, heart swelling. He wasn't angry. He wasn't grandstanding. He was teaching like he always did, one word at a time. Henry continued, "To our staff, I say this today is not a punishment, it's an awakening. We'll review our systems, retrain our teams, and rebuild our culture together, because respect is not a policy, it's a practice." He looked directly into the cameras now, and to anyone who's ever been told they don't belong, whether in a boardroom, a classroom, or a plane seat. Remember, you don't need permission to exist in the sky. The reporters went silent. For a full 3 seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the terminal lights. Then, a wave of applause, not loud, but steady, heartfelt. Maya looked up at him, eyes bright. "You sounded like Grandpa when you said that." Henry chuckled softly. "Then maybe I'm finally learning from him." As they turned to leave, Mateo leaned close. That statement just rewrote this company's history. Henry. You realize that Henry gave a small nod. Good, because history only matters if it teaches something. They moved through the side corridor toward a private car waiting outside. The night air was crisp, the hum of London taxis distant. As the door closed, Maya leaned her head against her father's arm. "Dad, are you tired?" He smiled faintly. "A little. Do you ever wish you hadn't said anything?" Henry looked out the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "Every time I speak truth. Maya, I lose something comfort, quiet, sometimes friends, but I always gain something better." She tilted her head. "What's that?" He looked at her, his voice soft but sure. "Peace." The car pulled away from the terminal. Outside, on billboards and phones, headlines flashed, "Black CEO confronts discrimination and teaches the world." What leadership looks like. Henry exhaled slowly, the weight of the day settling at last. Maya took his hand again, her fingers small and warm in his. "Dad," she whispered. "Yes, I think the sky really does belong to everyone now." He smiled, eyes on the stars appearing above the city skyline. "Let's make sure it stays that way." And as the car disappeared into the London night, the story of Gate C-12, the story of calm, courage, and quiet justice began to ripple across the world. 3 weeks had passed since the world learned about what happened at Gate C-12. But the echoes of that moment hadn't faded. They'd multiplied through news outlets, social feeds, late-night talk shows, and dinner-table conversations. The name Henry Carter had become more than that of a CEO. It had become a conversation starter about bias, dignity, and quiet strength. At Skylink's glass headquarters in Manhattan, the lobby buzzed differently now. The glossy posters that once showcased luxury destinations had been replaced with a single, minimalist design. It read, "Every passenger, every flight, every dignity." Mateo Cruz stood at the foot of the main staircase, clipboard in hand, watching the staff file into the newly opened Ethics Auditorium, a room Henry had insisted be built within days. Its walls were lined with murals depicting people of every background, from mechanics to captains to families boarding planes together. Karen Doyle, the head of communications, whispered to Mateo as the room filled, "It's been less than a month, and bookings are up 12%. Customer confidence is higher than before the incident. You realize how rare that is?" Mateo nodded. People don't just want good service anymore. They want to believe in who's serving them. A hush fell over the room as Henry Carter stepped onto the stage. No lights, no music, no teleprompter. Just him, in a gray suit, and an expression that carried both weariness and conviction. He looked around at the hundreds of Skylink employees, from pilots to ground crew, new hires to senior executives. "I know what you're all thinking," he began quietly, "that this is about punishment, or reputation, or damage control. It's not." He paused, letting his words breathe. "This is about remembering who we said we were and admitting who we became instead." The room stayed still. He continued, "We built this airline on the promise that everyone deserves to fly with dignity. Somewhere along the way, we traded that promise for procedure, for speed, for convenience, but respect should never be optional." He turned to Matteo. "You have the data." Matteo nodded, projecting the report behind them. Over the past 18 months, Skylink logged 42 verified complaints of bias, but only 6 reached corporate review. The rest were internally dismissed, often labeled as misunderstanding. A ripple of discomfort spread through the room. Henry let the silence linger. "That stops today." He pressed a button on the podium. A new document appeared on screen. Its header bold, "The Skylink Equity Initiative." "Effective immediately," Henry said. "We will overhaul every system that touches our passengers and our people. That means transparent reporting, anonymous logging, quarterly ethics reviews, and a new department led by Mr. Cruz dedicated to equality enforcement. We will no longer rely on unspoken rules or silent corrections." He looked toward Ben Rowe, seated near the front, "and we will start where the harm began, at the gates." Ben stood, visibly emotional. "Sir, if I may, I want to help." Henry nodded approvingly. "You already are. You'll lead our first cultural retraining unit for flight staff, not to punish them, but to teach them what it means to truly see people." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was steady, sincere, the kind that meant understanding, not just agreement. Karen leaned over to Matteo. "This isn't a campaign. It's a confession turned into a movement." Matteo whispered back, "And it's working." Later that day, in a smaller meeting room, Henry sat with the corporate board. They were pragmatic, cautious, some still worried about the company's exposure. One director, a gray-haired man named Owens, spoke first. "Henry, I admire the vision, but full transparency. Allowing passengers to report bias directly to regulators, that's risky." Henry folded his hands calmly. So was silence. Owens exhaled. "And the terminations. They're not terminations," Henry said. "They're course corrections. We're not removing people. We're removing the habits that broke them." The board fell quiet. Eventually, Owens nodded. "All right, you have our backing." When the meeting ended, Henry returned to his office, a spacious corner suite overlooking the Hudson. Maya was there, perched on his couch with her laptop open. She'd been doing homework, but her screen showed a news article instead. "Dad," she said, looking up. "They made a documentary." He raised a brow. "Already it's called The Man in 2A. She smiled proudly. "Everyone's talking about it. They say you changed the way people think about bias." Henry sat beside her, glancing at the article. "Change starts with awareness. Maya. The hard part is keeping it alive once people move on to the next headline." She leaned against him. "Then don't let them forget." He smiled faintly. "I don't intend to." Just then, Matteo entered, holding a folder. "Henry, you should see this. Tricia Miles, the boarding supervisor from JFK, she's made a public statement." Henry took the folder, unfolding the document. It was a handwritten letter, scanned and shared online. To Mr. Carter, to my colleagues, and to every passenger I've ever met, I was wrong. I thought I was protecting rules, but I was protecting fear. You taught me what humility looks like, and I intend to spend the rest of my career earning back what I lost." Henry read silently, his expression softening. "Send her a note," he said. "Tell her I accept her apology, and that when she's ready, there's a place for her in the new training division." Matteo nodded. "Already done." Henry smiled slightly. "Good man." He looked out the window. The city glowing below. "We're not just changing flights, Matteo. We're changing altitude." As the day ended, he stood at the glass, watching the skyline shimmer in the sunset, the reflection of his daughter beside him, the faint hum of planes passing overhead. It all felt like symmetry. The man who once had to prove he belonged in the sky now made sure everyone else could, too. 2 months after Gate C-12, the world was still talking about it. What had started as a tense moment in an airport had become a movement, not orchestrated, but organic. It grew from conversations, from empathy, from the uncomfortable recognition of truth. Across social media, the hashtag #ReseatToA had become shorthand for justice met with dignity. People shared their own stories, moments when they'd been misjudged, overlooked, or disrespected. But instead of bitterness, they shared hope. If Henry Carter could stay calm, one user wrote, "Maybe I can too." At Skylink's headquarters, screens displayed live feeds from company offices around the world: Tokyo, Nairobi, São Paulo, London, and Sydney, all hosting their first Skylink equity sessions. Matteo Cruz walked through the New York Training Center, watching groups of employees in uniform discussing new case studies about bias and inclusion. Ben Rowe stood at the front of one room, speaking to a small group of young flight attendants. "Empathy isn't weakness," he told them. "It's our strongest safety protocol, because if you can't see your passenger as human first, nothing else you do matters." The trainees listened intently. One of them, a young woman with braids tucked neatly under her cap, raised her hand. "Mr. Rowe, do you really think people can change?" Like, deep down, Ben smiled. "I don't think people change. I think they remember who they were before fear got in the way." The class went quiet, not from discipline, but reflection. Meanwhile, in another wing, Karen Doyle was on a video call with Skylink's partners in Europe. The background of her screen showed a large poster featuring Henry's quote, "Calm isn't silence, it's strength." "The media's tone has shifted," Karen said. "They're not covering this as a controversy anymore. They're calling it a case study in moral leadership." One executive from London nodded. "We've had passengers specifically request to fly Skylink because of this story. They say it feels safer not physically, but emotionally." Karen smiled faintly. "That's the goal." At that same moment, Henry Carter sat in his home office overlooking the Hudson River. The evening sun painted gold streaks across the water, and his reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. Maya sat on the rug beside him, surrounded by books and colored pens, working on a school project titled "People Who Change the World Without Shouting." He watched her for a moment, smiling. "That's a good title." She looked up. "It's about you." He laughed softly. "I hope it's not too long." She grinned. "I'm only on page 6. Henry leaned back in his chair, glancing at the framed headlines on the wall, not as trophies, but reminders. The calm that changed corporate America, Skylink's ethical revolution. Then his phone buzzed. It was Mateo. "Henry, you'll want to see this." He clicked the video link. On screen, a group of airline CEOs from around the world stood together at a press conference in Geneva. Behind them was a new banner, the Global Flight for Fairness Initiative. Mateo's voice came through. 12 airlines have adopted our training model. Even the International Aviation Association is mandating bias awareness as part of crew certification. Henry's lips curved in a quiet smile. "So, the sky's getting bigger." Mateo chuckled. "Exactly." Henry paused. "Make sure this isn't about my name. Mateo, make it about the principle." Mateo's voice softened. "It already is. You just gave people permission to act on what they already knew was right." When the call ended, Henry set the phone down and turned toward the living room. On the coffee table sat a stack of letters handwritten. Physical, sent by people he'd never met. Veterans, single mothers, teachers, students. Some said thank you. Others simply said, "I understand now." He picked one envelope from the pile and read aloud to Maya, "Dear Mr. Carter, I'm a flight attendant. Last year, I saw a man get humiliated for no reason, and I didn't speak up. I told myself it wasn't my place. Watching what you did made me realize silence is its own kind of violence. I've changed how I see people and myself. Thank you." Maya was quiet. "She sounds brave." Henry smiled. "Bravery isn't about standing first. It's about standing next." They sat together in silence for a while. Outside, a plane traced a line across the twilight sky, faint, distant, but steady. Later that week, Henry and Mateo attended a live broadcast for a major news network. The host, a well-known journalist, turned to him on air. "Mr. Carter, people are calling you the face of a new kind of leadership, quiet, ethical, uncompromising. What do you think of that?" Henry smiled faintly. "I think leadership should never need a face. It should have a heart." The host leaned forward. "And what's next for Skylink?" "Listening," Henry said simply. "We're good at flying. Now we need to get good at understanding." The studio went still, then applause small at first, then growing, that night as Henry returned home. Maya was waiting up. She ran to hug him. "You look so calm on TV." He laughed quietly. "I was terrified." She pulled back, surprised. "You didn't show it. That's the trick," he said softly. "Courage looks calm because it's louder on the inside." She thought for a moment, then said, "Dad, do you think what happened to us was supposed to happen?" Henry looked out the window at the faint outline of a plane disappearing into the stars. "Maybe. Some stories aren't meant to break us. Maya, they're meant to wake us up." The next morning, as dawn broke over New York, the Skylink headquarters lit up with the first sunlight. Workers were already arriving, holding coffee cups, chatting about training sessions and updates. On the glass wall near the main entrance, a new inscription had been added overnight. "The sky remembers who lifted others to reach it." Henry Carter. Inside, Ben Rowe stood before a class of new recruits. He began the session with a simple sentence. "Before you learn how to serve people, you have to learn how to see them." And in that small moment, like the first quiet ripple of a vast ocean, the legacy of Gate C-12 lived on. Not as a scandal, not as a tragedy, but as a story of transformation, one calm voice at a time. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the letter arrived. Henry had just finished making coffee strong, black, the way his late father used to drink it. The city outside was barely awake, the first light brushing against the skyline. Maya was still asleep upstairs. When he opened the front door to fetch the paper, he noticed a small envelope tucked between the folds. No corporate stamp, no typed address, just his name, Henry Carter, handwritten in blue ink. He almost set it aside with the others, but something about the careful handwriting made him pause. It wasn't a fan letter or a media request. The ink had weight like it was written by someone who still believed words could matter. He opened it slowly. Dear Mr. Carter, you don't know me, but I used to work for Skylink in customer service, Terminal D, back in 2016. My name is Grace Thompson. I was the woman who got fired for defending a passenger when I shouldn't have spoken out. I lost my job, my savings, and, for a while, my faith in fairness. I wrote to the company back then, asking for a review. No one ever answered. When I saw you on the news this year, standing calmly in that airport, I cried. Because for the first time, I realized maybe you didn't know. Maybe the system that broke me also silenced you. I'm not writing to ask for my job back. I've built a small business now, and I'm doing fine. I'm writing to tell you that I forgive Skylink, and I forgive you, because when I saw you standing beside your daughter, I realized that the man I blamed was also fighting his own unseen battles. Thank you for showing the world that real power doesn't shout. It listens. Sincerely, Grace Thompson. Henry sat still for a long moment, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. The scent of coffee faded into the background. The city noise outside seemed far away. He whispered the name under his breath. Grace Thompson. It hit him like a weight. Not guilt, exactly, but gravity, the kind that comes when a truth finds you after years of silence. He reached for his phone and called Mateo. Mateo, I need you to find a record Skylink, Terminal D, 2016, employee named Grace Thompson. There was a brief pause on the line. Of course. Are you all right? Henry looked at the letter again. I will be within an hour. Mateo sent over the file. Grace had indeed been terminated 8 years ago, her report dismissed under breach of conduct. Her supervisor at the time had written, overstepped authority by interfering in passenger issue. Henry felt a knot tighten in his chest. He stared at the words for a long time, then closed the file and leaned back in his chair. Maya came downstairs in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. Mornin', Dad? He smiled faintly. Mornin', sweetheart. She noticed the letter on the table. What's that? Something important? He said softly. She sat beside him, reading the signature. Grace Thompson. Who is she? Henry exhaled slowly. Someone who paid the price for a system I didn't fix soon enough. Maya looked up at him, thoughtful. What are you going to do? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the window, the sunlight spreading across the floor. What do you think I should do? She shrugged gently. You always say fairness starts when someone decides to do more than say sorry. Henry chuckled quietly. You listened too well. Later that day, he drove to Skylink headquarters. Mateo was already there, waiting in his office with the file open. I found her, Mateo said. Grace Thompson runs a small bakery in Philadelphia now called The Sky's Bread. Can you believe that Henry smiled faintly? Poetic justice. He read through the report again, shaking his head. 8 years, and she still found it in her heart to forgive us. Mateo nodded. She's remarkable. Henry closed the folder. Then let's make it right. 2 weeks later, a quiet news story appeared online. No press conference, no cameras, just a headline: Skylink CEO reinstates former employee with full pension after 8 years cites moral debt. Grace Thompson received a call directly from Henry. She answered, cautious at first. "Ms. Thompson," he began, "I don't expect you to forgive a company that failed you, but I wanted to say thank you for reminding me that justice isn't about catching mistakes. It's about correcting them." Her voice wavered. "Mr. Carter, I never thought you'd even read that letter." "I did," he said gently, "and I needed it." There was silence on the line, the kind that doesn't need filling. "I started my bakery to move on," she said quietly. "I called it the Sky's Bread because I wanted to believe the sky still had room for me." Henry smiled. "It always did. We just forgot to look up." They talked for nearly 20 minutes, not about policies or restitution, but about life, kindness, and how forgiveness sometimes travels farther than justice. When the call ended, Henry sat back in his chair, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. Later that night, he found Maya in the living room, working on her project again. She looked up and smiled. "How was your day?" He sat beside her, tired but content. "I learned something new. About work," she asked. "About Grace," he said softly. She tilted her head. "You mean the person or the word?" He smiled faintly. "Both." Maya leaned her head on his shoulder. "You did something good again, didn't you?" He chuckled. "Maybe, but this time, I didn't fix something. I just listened." Outside, a plane flew low over the city, its lights blinking against the dark sky. Henry watched it disappear into the horizon, the sound fading gently. And for the first time since that morning at Gate C-12, he felt the quiet certainty that everything, every wrong, every lesson, every act of forgiveness had finally come full circle. The stage lights in the Washington Convention Center shimmered against the deep blue backdrop that read Global Forum for Ethical Leadership, 2027. Henry Carter stood backstage, adjusting his tie. He'd spoken at hundreds of conferences before, but tonight felt different. This wasn't about quarterly earnings or innovation. It was about conscience. Through the curtain, he could hear the hum of 1,000 people leaders, activists, educators, and ordinary citizens who'd flown in from across the world to hear him speak. Maya sat in the front row, her hair tied neatly, a quiet pride glowing in her eyes. She'd grown so much since that morning at Gate C-12. She'd seen her father fight, not with anger, but with grace. And she'd learned that strength doesn't have to roar to be heard. When Henry stepped onto the stage, the room rose in a standing ovation. Cameras flashed. Applause rolled like thunder, but he simply raised his hand in gratitude and waited until silence settled. 3 years ago, he began. I stood in an airport with my daughter and learned something I should have already known, that respect is still not automatic, that fairness still needs a voice. He looked out at the crowd, eyes calm but steady. Since then, I've seen change, real, measurable, human change, but I've also seen something more powerful than reform. I've seen redemption. He paused, letting the word hang. When we first launched the Skylink Equity Initiative, people said it was corporate theater. But now, 3 years later, it's become an international model, not because of policies, but because of people who decided to see differently. He gestured toward the side of the stage, where Grace Thompson stood among a small group of guests. She smiled warmly, her presence quiet but radiant. "Grace taught me," Henry continued, that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's how humanity resets itself when justice alone isn't enough. The crowd remained silent, listening not like an audience, but like witnesses to something intimate. Henry's voice softened. The truth is, I didn't change Skylink. I just listened long enough for Skylink to change itself. Every mechanic, every attendant, every supervisor who decided to see the human before the uniform, they're the real architects of this new sky. He stepped back from the podium, took a breath, and smiled faintly. The title of this forum is "The Sky Belongs to Everyone." I couldn't think of a better truth. The sky doesn't ask who you are, what color you are, or where you're from. It just lets you rise if you dare. The hall erupted in applause again this time, not for the man, but for the message. After the ceremony, Henry walked outside with Matteo and Maya. The night was warm, the air still humming with the energy of the event. Reporters lingered at a distance, but Henry waved them off politely. "I think that's enough talking for one lifetime," he said with a soft laugh. Matteo chuckled. "You might be right, though. You've started something bigger than any of us expected. Did you know the UN just invited Skylink to help design their Global Inclusion Charter?" Henry raised an eyebrow. "They did." Matteo nodded. "You're changing more than skies now. You're changing systems." Henry smiled, thoughtful. "Then let's make sure we change them for the right reasons." They reached the rooftop terrace of the hotel, overlooking the city lots. Maya walked ahead, leaning against the railing, eyes wide at the glittering skyline. "Dad," she said quietly, "do you ever think about that day? The one at gate C12 Henry joined her side. Every day. It was the hardest lesson I never wanted, but the one I needed most." She turned to him. "Do you think it would have happened if you weren't you?" He thought for a long moment. "Probably. Maybe to someone else. Maybe worse. But sometimes the right story finds the person who's ready to carry it." Maya smiled faintly. "I'm glad it found you." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "I'm glad it found us." They stood there for a while, watching planes rise and descend in the distance, little streaks of light crossing a vast canvas of night. Behind them, Matteo leaned against the doorway, quietly observing. He'd spent his life working in the shadow of ethics and policy, but this watching his friend at peace felt like witnessing something pure. He joined them by the railing. "Henry, you know, in every ethics manual I've ever read, they talk about accountability, restitution, structure, but they never talk about stillness." Henry smiled. "That's because stillness can't be taught. It's earned." Maya looked up at the two men. "You mean like calm?" Henry nodded. "Exactly like calm." The conversation drifted into silence, filled only by the faint hum of airplanes overhead. A few days later, Skylink released its final report on the Global Equity Initiative. It concluded with a statement Henry had personally written. "Our journey began in conflict, but ended in connection. We learned that equity is not about giving more to some, but giving everyone the dignity to belong. The sky will always belong to everyone who believes they have the right to rise." The report went viral, quoted in universities, boardrooms, even churches. Henry received countless messages from around the world, but the one that stayed with him came from a teenage girl in Nairobi. "Mr. Carter, I watched your story in school. My teacher said courage is what you did, but I think courage is what you gave to the rest of us." He printed that email and kept it framed on his desk, right beside a photograph of Maya at 12, smiling beside him on their first Skylink flight together. On the anniversary of the Gate C-12 incident, Henry and Maya returned quietly to JFK Airport. There, by the same terminal, a small plaque had been placed on the wall. It read, in memory of the moment that taught us to see again, dedicated to all who believe that the sky belongs to everyone. Maya touched the plaque gently. "It feels smaller than I imagined," she said. Henry smiled. That's how big things usually start. They stood together in silence, surrounded by the familiar echoes of airport chatter and boarding calls. "Ready to go home?" Henry asked. Maya looked up at him. "Not yet. I just want to watch the planes for a while." He nodded. "Then, let's watch." The two of them sat by the window, side by side, father and daughter, no titles, no cameras, just peace. And as another plane lifted off into the open sky, Henry Carter finally smiled, not the smile of a man who had won, but of one who had learned, healed, and believed. Because in the end, the sky had always belonged to everyone. He had just helped the world remember. The story of Henry Carter reminds us that justice is not always loud. It is often calm, steady, and born from compassion. In a world where prejudice still hides behind procedures and appearances, Henry teaches us that real strength doesn't come from control or anger, but from the choice to act with grace when the world expects rage. He could have humiliated those who wronged him, but instead, he chose to rebuild them. He turned punishment into accountability, and humiliation into understanding. That's what true leadership looks like, not the power to dominate, but the humility to repair. For older generations who've seen both progress and pain, this story is a quiet reflection. Dignity never ages, and empathy never expires. We may not all be CEOs or heroes, but we all carry the same responsibility to leave the world a little fairer than we found it. When you face injustice, remember Henry's calm. When you have power, remember his mercy. And when you have the chance to choose, always choose respect. Thank you for watching and feeling this story with us. If it touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of courage, justice, and humanity to life. Because every view, every comment, every share keeps these lessons flying further than we ever could alone.